Welcome back to your news bulletin. The global number of COVID-19 deaths from the virus has exceeded 450,000, while the cases crossed 8.4 million. Brazil has reported 1,238 fatalities in the past 24 hours. In the US, 704 people lost their lives overnight, raising the tally to over 118,000. Further details in this report.
Latin America remains the hardest hit region from the coronavirus pandemic as thousands lose their lives every day. While Brazil's death toll increased to nearly 48,000, Mexico's tally rose by 677 to 19,747. Over in the US, California state has ordered residents to wear face masks in most settings outside the home. New York City will begin phase 2 of opening from Monday after continued improvements in COVID-19 data. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says he is considering a quarantine for travelers from Florida due to virus fears.
The federal government's attitude is an undeniable mistake when it has come to dealing with COVID. Their guidance, their doctrine is an undeniable mistake.
Thailand says it will allow inbound international travel to resume next month for business purposes. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says the country will ease entry restrictions for people coming from Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, and Vietnam. The Chinese capital, Beijing, has been put under partial lockdown after a surge in new cases. Tighter travel restrictions to and from Beijing are in place to contain the recent flare-up of COVID-19 related to a wholesale market.
主要包含3类人员。
Individuals who fall into the following 3 categories are not allowed to leave Beijing. They are those confirmed suspected of coronavirus infection, close contacts, asymptomatic patients, and those with fever. People who have been to the Shenfai Farm Produce Market or have had close contact with those people since May 30th, and those from the medium and high-risk areas.
Meanwhile, Kuwait has decided to ease curfew hours to start from 7 p.m. until 5 a.m., effective from June 21st. The cabinet has also decided to extend the first phase of a 5-phase plan to return to normal life for 1 more week. Over in Sweden, the health agency says about 6% of people in the country have developed COVID-19 antibodies.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 136 people have died due to COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, raising the toll to over 3,200. The Health Ministry says Pakistan saw a consecutive 5th-day decline in the ratio of new cases as 4,944 infections were registered overnight. The ministry said the tally of patients has surpassed 165,000 with more than 100,000 active cases. It said over 61,000 patients have recovered so far. The ministry said it has now tested over 1 million people for the virus. It said the province of Sindh leads in the number of cases with more than 62,000 infections. Officials said 103 ventilators have been added in the national health sector, increasing the total to over 1,500. In other news, Indian troops have martyred 6 more civilians in occupied Kashmir. This takes the toll to 36 this month so far. The civilians were killed during a coordinated search operation in Pulwama and Shopian districts. 4 youths were martyred at Bandwama Chitragam area of Shopian, while 2 others were martyred inside a mosque in Pampore area of Pulwama. Indian troops also used root force and fired tear gas shells at demonstrators in Pampore. The occupied valley has been under a crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 319 days. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Qureshi says Islamabad voted against India's non-permanent membership of the UN Security Council. In a policy statement before the Senate of Pakistan, Qureshi said India is a violator of the Security Council resolution on Kashmir. Qureshi said Indian actions in Kashmir are in violation of the UN Charter and international norms. He said Pakistan is focused on exposing India's sinister designs at the world level. Meanwhile, the Foreign Ministry said the world community should pay attention to the plight of Kashmiri women in India. In a statement on the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict, the ministry said Kashmiri women have been frequent targets of sexual violence by Indian occupation forces. The US says it has reduced its troops' presence in Afghanistan to 8,600, the level agreed to as part of the Doha deal with the Taliban. Speaking at a webinar, CENTCOM Commander General Kenneth McKenzie said a full withdrawal depends on the Taliban fulfilling their commitments. McKenzie said the peace deal requires the US to fully withdraw its forces by next May. He said the Taliban are already at odds with ISIS, but the US needs to see what the group does against the militants. He said Washington wants to be satisfied that attacks against the US are not going to be generated from Afghanistan. As part of the deal, the Taliban agreed not to allow any violent group to use Afghan territory to plan or carry out attacks on the US. The International Atomic Energy Agency has passed a resolution calling on Iran to stop denying the agency access to two suspected former sites. Diplomats said the decision was made by the Board of Governors of the UN nuclear watchdog in a meeting today. The resolution asks Iran to let inspectors into the sites mentioned in two reports of the nuclear watchdog. The agency said the disputed sites can still host undeclared nuclear material or traces of it. The resolution was submitted by Britain, France, and Germany. China says US threats to arbitrarily cut ties with Beijing will not be a realistic or wise decision. In a press briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian made these remarks in response to President Donald Trump's statement. In a tweet earlier, President Trump said Washington has a policy option to disassociate with Beijing. Trump's statement came a day after Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said decoupling the US and Chinese economies was not a viable option. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington and the G7 nations are gravely concerned over Beijing's new security law on Hong Kong. The former Atlanta police officer charged in the murder of an armed black man, Rashid Brooks, has turned himself in to the authorities. Jail records show Jarrett Rolfe, who is charged with felony murder and 10 other counts, was being held at the Fulton County Jail. Fulton County's African-American District Attorney Paul Howard said he had recommended no bond for Rolfe. Howard said he himself had received a series of racist threats, including one from an individual who threatened to burn down his home. Meanwhile, the second officer, Devin Brosnan, who faces lesser charges, was released on bond. Brosnan's lawyer rejected claims his client had agreed to become the state's witness, saying he had only promised to cooperate with the investigation. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled against President Donald Trump's bid to end a major program that protects young immigrants from deportation. The justices upheld lower court rulings that found Trump's move unlawful. The program protects about 650,000 young people who entered the U.S. without documents as children. Trump raged against the ruling, implying that the Supreme Court does not like him. The Trump administration has sought to end the Obama-era policy since 2017. Meanwhile, former President Barack Obama praised the ruling and urged voters to elect a Democratic president and Congress in November. The U.S. has blacklisted Mexico's oil company Libya Bordo, amongst several others, over trade of Venezuelan oil. In a statement, the Treasury Department said it sanctioned 3 individuals, 8 entities, and 2 vessels for skirting U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. In a tweet, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the oil for food agreement between Caracas and Libre had no intention of providing food to the people. In response to the sanctions, the oil firm said its exchange of humanitarian aid with Venezuela should not be subjected to sanctions. Meanwhile, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arrizia called on the UN to act, saying Caracas will take the matter to the International Criminal Court. Turkey says Ankara is ready to cooperate with the US and Libya in the near future. At a webinar, Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said The foreign and defense ministries will soon work with U.S. counterparts on Libya. Çavuşoğlu said President Tayyip Erdogan and U.S. President Donald Trump have similar perspectives on the war-torn country. He said the development will be important for regional stability and Libya's future. The foreign minister said Ankara will like to further expand the areas of cooperation with the U.S. His statement follows a Turkish delegation's visit to the Libyan capital Tripoli, where it held a series of meetings with the government. Chinese prosecutors have charged 2 detained Canadians with alleged espionage. The case has driven a diplomatic wedge between Ottawa and Beijing. The Supreme People's Procuratorate said former Canadian diplomat Michael Kovrig was indicted for spying on state secrets and intelligence. It said businessman Michael Spavor was arraigned for suspected spying on secrets and illegally providing them to overseas forces. Kovrig and Spavor were arrested by Chinese authorities late last year. The Canadian government has repeatedly described their detention as arbitrary. Germany has accused Russia of murdering a Chechen asylum seeker in Berlin, exacerbating already strained relations between the two countries. In a statement, the prosecutor's office said the suspect under arrest had received orders from Moscow to murder Zelim Khan Karashovli last summer. The prosecutors formally charged the 49-year-old Russian national with the murder and the violation of Germany's weapons law. On Thursday, the foreign ministry summoned the Russian envoy to convey Berlin's stance regarding the murder case. Reacting, Ambassador Sergei Nechayev said these accusations are groundless and not backed by the evidence. We're now taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has branded former National Security Advisor John Bolton as a traitor over his explosive new memoir. In a tweet, Pompeo accused Bolton of violating his sacred trust with the American people by spreading lies and half-truths. According to some of the experts, Bolton claims Trump pleaded for help from China to win re-election in 2020. Bolton alleged that Pompeo dismissed Trump's North Korea diplomacy, saying it had zero probability of success after the 2018 Singapore summit. Meanwhile, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Trump is ethically unfit and intellectually unprepared to be the president. Pelosi said she was consulting with fellow Democrats on whether to subpoena Bolton about the allegations in the book. Facebook has deactivated dozens of ads placed by U.S. President Donald Trump's re-election campaign for using symbols once used by the Nazis. In a statement, the social media giant said the ads violated their policy against organized hate. The post also asked users to sign a petition against the anti-fascist movement Antifa, but the ad on Trump's page alone gained as many as 950,000 impressions in one day. Similar ads on Vice President Mike Pence's page gained as many as 500,000 impressions. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić says he will reject the EU membership if Belgrade does not receive concessions in return for recognizing Kosovo. After meeting Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Vučić said no resolution of Serbia's future ties with Kosovo will be possible without Moscow's consent. Serbia, which is in talks to join the EU, has set a number of preconditions for normalizing ties with Kosovo. It also wants to regulate outstanding problems, including issues related to energy and finances. Kosovo, where Albanians account for 90% of the population, declared independence from Serbia in 2008. In Brazil, a former aide to President Jair Bolsonaro's son has been arrested in a graft investigation. Prosecutors said Fabrício Queiroz was arrested from the home of Bolsonaro family's personal lawyer. Queiroz was brought in for questioning over bank transactions of $230,000 in a suspected embezzlement scheme. Qure's lawyer has deemed his client's arrest unnecessary and ruled out a plea deal. Bolsonaro's son has denied any wrongdoing, branding the inquiry a political attack on his family. Meanwhile, the president lashed out at Qure's arrest, describing it as a spectacle.
It
was a spectacle of an arrest. He must be in Rio de Janeiro by now, being assisted by a lawyer. Justice is on its way. It looked as if they were arresting the greatest thug on the face of earth, but justice is on its way. I repeat, he was not on the run and there was no order for his arrest.
In New Zealand, a police officer has been killed after an unidentified person shot him during a routine traffic stop in Auckland. Police are hunting the person, who also left wounded another officer while fleeing his car. Schools and daycare centers near the scene of the incident in Auckland were on lockdown as the police search for the shooter. In a statement, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the death was devastating. New Zealand Police Commissioner Andrew Coster did not provide details on why the car was stopped by the officers.
This violence was directed at police, it seems, as a result of a traffic stop. Clearly, any person with a firearm in this state of mind is dangerous, but I don't believe that the general public needs to be concerned at this point in time.
In Ivory Coast, 13 people have died in a landslide near Abidjan city after a drainage channel burst due to torrential rains. Abidjan's prefect Vincent Tobi said several others are missing. The prefect said 20 houses were also swept away by the floods in the area. The mayor of Anyama, Mido Sela, said the death toll is expected to rise as the search for survivors was still going on. Abidjan is home to some 5 million people, many of whom live in precarious shanty towns in flood-prone or dangerous zones. Clover Biopharmaceuticals says it is testing a 6th experimental COVID-19 vaccine from China in humans. This comes as an early-stage study of Clover's candidate is underway with vaccine boosters from UK's GSK and US-based Dynex. The company said the trial will evaluate the two different boosters in combination with Clover's candidate shot SCB 2019. It said the trial will enroll about 150 adults and elderly patients. Clover said initial safety data from the study is expected in August this year, and it will target to start broader studies by the end of this year. UN High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grandi has asked international leadership to address the migrant issue. During a briefing to UN Security Council, Grandi said the number of displaced people has doubled to almost 80 million in the last 10 years. He said the surge has occurred due to decades of wars and violence, exacerbated by poor governance and inequality. He said the trend shows when leadership and multilateralism fail to deliver, the peripheries of nations with no power feel the impact. Grandi said unity and the leadership of Security Council is required to solve this crisis. He urged the global community to follow up on ceasefire calls. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the government and institutions are being targeted by state-based cyber hacks. Morrison said the attacks are widespread, covering essential services and businesses as well. The Prime Minister declined to identify a specific state actor. He said the attacks have happened over many months and are increasing. Morrison said his announcement is intended to urge businesses to improve their defenses.
Raise this issue today, not to raise concerns in the public's mind, but to raise awareness in the public's mind. This is the world that we live in.
German payments company Wirecard AG stocks have slumped more than 60% over a fraud of about $2 billion. In a statement, the online payments giant said it is an aggrieved party in case of fraud of considerable proportions. Wirecard said there was evidence of false figures intended to deceive the auditor and create a wrong perception of the existence of such cash balances. It said missing money was supposed to be held in accounts at 2 Asian banks and had been set aside for risk management. But the company's auditor said the banks had been unable to provide the account numbers. Auditor EY refused to sign off its 2019 accounts over a missing amount and said they were unable to confirm the money existed. The missing amount is equivalent to about a quarter of the company's total balance sheet. European stock markets are trading higher over hopes of stimulus measures by central banks. Utilities, oil and gas stocks lead the regional gains as major European countries ease COVID-19 lockdown. CAC 40 in Paris is trading nearly 1% higher. London's FTSE 100 has gained nearly 1% after the Bank of England announced plans to inject fresh stimulus measures to fight COVID-19 fallout. Frankfurt's DAX has gained 0.75%. In Asia, Shanghai Composite led the gains, which closed nearly 1% higher. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index edged higher by nearly 0.75%. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil has gained over 3%. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.